Welcome to the Kelly Cardenas podcast, where attitude is everything. On today's show, this man needs no introduction. If you're on planet Earth, you know who he is. He's the greatest sports agent in the history of his industry. This is the man who makes superstars, and he's probably one of the most humble guys, most educated guys, and getting to spend a little bit of time around him has just been hugely enriching for my life. Getting to be able to see things from a completely different perspective. But welcome to the show, Mr. Leigh Steinberg.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Well, it's great. It's great to be able to see you. I want to hop right in and ask you in your career, which has been, the storied, which we're going to get into here in a little bit. What would you say, Leigh, is your biggest regret, if there's any, in your professional career?
It's probably the fact that I was raised by a father with two core values. One was treasure relationship, and second was making a positive difference in the world and helping people who can't help themselves. And my regrets are always that I haven't been able to without being grandiose, push back climate change, deal with domestic violence, deal with bullying, deal with sex trafficking, deal with racism. And as much as we've worked on all of these issues, there's still much more work to do.
So when someone thinks about the number one sports agent in the world, and then you talk about, at your Super Bowl party just recently, brain health was a huge part of it, was a huge aspect of it. You're talking about the racism part. You're talking about climate change. How do these connect with being in your profession as far as the sports agent?
So, what I discovered was that athletes are the movie stars, athletes are the celebrities in communities across this country. They're the subject of idol worship and veneration. And so that gives them the profile to trigger imitative behavior and have an impact on other people. And so while it might not immediately be apparent, if Lennox Lewis, the boxing champion I represented, cuts a public service announcement that says real men don't hit women, it can do more to trigger rebellious adolescents to have a different attitude towards domestic violence than 1,000 authority figures ever could. So we ask the athletes to retrace their roots and go back to the high school community, set up a scholarship fund, work with a Boys and Girls Club or a church, and then go to the university community and commit back to that program. And then at the professional level, put together a charitable foundation that will tackle some basic problem that a player would like to leave a legacy for. And so that will be the leading business figures, political figures, and community leaders on an advisory board that can execute a program. So that's like work done putting the 200th single mother and their family in the first home they'll ever own by making a down payment and having it outfitted. So it's athletes changing lives.
So Leigh, they say all the time that the way that humans learn the best is through storytelling. And I think that there's probably no better storyteller in the world than you, because you've had some of the experiences that most people only dream of. You talked about a experience, I believe it was with Troy Aikman, where was it Troy Aikman where you're in the limo with him and you let him know that things are going to change, right? Can you talk to us about this kind of story? Because for me, I would love to, that's why I'd love to be able to have you on the show, because I want to be able to hear these stories, but to be able to transfer them in for people to be able to understand and know the scope of your stories are so phenomenal. Can you start with that one there?
So the Super Bowl, if you will, has become the convention of Americana, and it's the number one sports marketing event in the world. So Troy Aikman back in 93 goes to play at the Rose Bowl and for the Dallas Cowboys, and they decisively beat Buffalo. So we're in the limo on the way back from that victorious afternoon, and I say, Troy, do you realize what just happened? And he said, yes, I won the game. You know, we won the game. And I said, no, when you walked on the field, you were Troy Aikman, good quarterback. And now you're Troy Aikman, name up in lights. You're now but have morphed into superstardom, and your life will never be the same. And he was sort of looking at me like, yeah, really. And then we stopped at the Lowe's Hotel in Santa Monica, tried to get out of the car, but there were hundreds of people mobbing him, and he got the visual picture.
So one of the most prolific athletes right now is one that you represent, which is Patrick Mahomes. Now, can you talk to us too about like a Patrick Mahomes who is obviously naturally gifted? I mean, gifted at a level that most would never. I mean, they wouldn't have as much talent in their whole body as he does in like one fingernail. But there's deciding factors, right? So there's little things that happen. Can you talk to us about what makes Patrick Mahomes so special, and maybe tell us a little bit of a story about Patrick that maybe we don't hear in the regular press?
So you have someone who's preternaturally mature and grounded and understands not to get into the highs and lows of sports. He's got an eidetic memory, so he can remember everything that ever happened on a field and adjust to it. He's naturally concerned about other people and their feelings, which makes him a great leader. If you met him, uh, Kelly, he'd ask, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? So he's got that sense. And for a franchise quarter, so when he's playing at Texas Tech, they're so far behind in every game. The defense is giving him so many points that he has to press to try to score a touchdown on every drive. So it gave people a sense of him as a gunslinger without projecting and understanding that he could do a 3, 5, 7 step drop. He could take the ball under center, and he could be a disciplined quarterback. So we watched as people started to be able to project what his talent level was. And he goes right out the very first year he starts, and he's MVP of the entire league. But it didn't change him internally. He was still the same grounded human being and focused on what the steps were that got him there. We always say stay in the process instead of fixating on the future outcome. Stay in the process doing those things necessary to achieve success and keep focused on them, and then the results will turn out well. So, with a franchise quarterback, what you're looking at is this quality. What do they do in adversity? So a quarterback's thrown a couple interceptions, the crowd is booing, the center's looking at the quarterback like his decision making means he's on hallucinogens. The game is getting out of hand. What does he do now? Can he compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, and elevate his level of play in critical situations to take a team to and through victory? And he's got that capacity. We call it a quiet mind. And the ability to focus in on this moment, it's a critical skill for all of us to be present in this moment with all your energy and focus and resource going into this moment. And to focus on listening skills, to be able to draw another human being out and understand their deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams. And put yourself in the other person's heart and mind and see the world the way they see it. Because if you do that, you can navigate your way through life gracefully.
Leigh, when you're around the type of people that you are, I mean, when we list off the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks, they were your client, and not only were your client, but they're your friends. What are some of the funniest stories about these people that we never hear? Because we hear of them winning a Super Bowl. We hear of them. But what are some of those things? What are some of those stories that...
Well, Warren Moon, for example, who was my client for 23 years, had an avocation which was cooking. So he developed a unique strain of chocolate chip cookies, and he formed W. Moon's Chocolate Chippery. And but we were on a national tour trying to find him a team to uh, come back to the NFL with. And we went to different cities, and in one city, the owner said looked at the skyline in the background and said, "This can all be yours." And there was a Texas owner who said, "I'll give you an oil well." And someone else said, "Oh, you can own this building." And then ultimately, we get to New York, and it's 5 in the morning, and two taxi drivers crash in front and start screaming at each other. And I looked at Warren and I said, "Welcome to New York." So, Steve Young is in the shadow of Joe Montana. And even though he might have been the second best quarterback in the whole league, he was still sitting behind him. And when you're doing that, you're like the younger brother looking for approval from the older brother, but it's really hard to not play. And so he goes down to Miami in the Super Bowl, throws 6 touchdown passes, and wins the game. And I run down on the field, and he runs up and hugs me and says, "The monkey's off my back. The monkey's off my back." So you're looking at human beings that have all the same vulnerabilities, frailties, and lack of control over circumstances that we all do.
Do you still have pinch me moments? Because again, like you're not only or do you deal with the Mount Rushmore. I mean, Mr. Steinberg, you are Mount Rushmore. You're in a class of your own. There's the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks or of the NFL, and then there's a separate mountain that just has your head on it. So, so,
That's a frightening image for anyone.
well, I want to visit it, right? So when we think about that stuff, is there times where you still have pinch me stuff today? Like when we were at the Super Bowl party, right? I was in the back and I was talking to Edrin James, and Edrin he was so present with me, such an amazing individual. But every time we broke in conversation, he was looking up and he was like, "Can I go talk to Leigh? Can I go talk to Leigh?" Like he was like a little kid. Here's a Hall of Famer, a guy who changed the game. And he's fanboying over Leigh Steinberg. Is there any place in your life that you fanboy over anybody? Is there a place where you're still in that pinch me place?
Oh, absolutely. The Martin Luther Kings, Mahatma Gandhis, the great leaders. When Obama ran for president, in those early speeches, he was thrilling in the hope he offered. Um, so, but there are moments like when Warren Moon asked me to present him at the Hall of Fame. And I'm thinking back over 23 years, and we're standing there in front of 40,000 people, and I'm giving his presenting speech. Um, and that was the fruition of all his hopes and dreams. That was magical. Patrick Mahomes winning his first Super Bowl is magical. And the community and charitable programs, when they make a difference. So handing out an award to Rolf Benerschke, who did one of the first in San Diego charitable programs we did called Kicks for Critters, where he gave money to the Fund for Endangered Species every time he kicked a field goal, and then challenged the community to match at their own level. And now, many years later, we're giving him an award to sort of feed him. And I sort of grew up with these players from that distant past. And so that was a heartwarming moment.
Who do you see? Because when we talk about the Steve Youngs, the Troy Aikmans, we talk about the Brett Favres, we talk about those guys as the Dan Marinos, the Joe Montana. Who do you see in today's NFL that is going to be that for my kids? My son is 10 years old, so who is he going to be talking about like that for in the future?
Well, I think Patrick Mahomes is a great example because not only is he stunning on the field, I mean, it's to be that close to the Super Bowl year after year after year, win one, be the MVP. He's had extraordinary success in a very few years. But what he's done with it is to put together 15 in the Mahomes, which is a charitable foundation focused on youth charities. So he's uh, given 15 different organizations in Kansas City money to help at-risk kids, kids in hospitals, kids get lunches, and so it's what they do with it in terms of talent level. That whole AFC has a group of young quarterbacks in Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, that are all going to be superstars. Pro football is so popular today; it dominates our viewing patterns in so many ways that um, that these quarterbacks are larger than life figures that become movie stars in their own right.
So you're in a place where most people in business would they talk about. It's the holy grail of business, meaning that you're the buyer, not the seller. It's not like a Leigh Steinberg is out there saying like, come with me because I'm going to give you this package. It's like people want, I mean, they know if they're with you, then they're with the Mount Rushmore. Has there ever been a player that you wanted to represent that you didn't actually get to represent?
Oh, that will happen every year. It's a match of values.
Mm.
If you have the same feelings about short-term economic gain, long-term economic security, the importance of family, spiritual values, being part of a geographical location, and then if you can understand those values and project them, it will draw people towards you who do the same thing. So there occasionally have been athletes who are not interested in being a role model or charity or second career. And I realized it just would not be a good fit. Every time you represent someone, you're cutting up a little portion of life to share with that person. And the only thing we can't replace is time. And so it's important to realize that this moment and this experience is every bit as critical as moments in the past or moments in the future, and focus in on it. So if you don't have a really passionate feeling about a young man or woman, then I'd rather not represent them.
What was the turning point for you to go from, because early in our careers, right? And I would hope to think that you're human. Um, but early in our career, especially in business, we're out hustling. We're working to get what it is that we need or whatever it is. And then we get to this point where we slow down and we choose mastery and allow the things that need to come to us come to us. And obviously you're at that point now. Was there a turning point for you? And if there was, what was that?
Probably struggling with sobriety and the fact that I had a battle with alcohol. And uh, next month I'll be 12 years continuously sober. Um, and I was always the expert on every subject except being able to stop drinking. And I finally got to that point where all I could think about was where I could find more vodka. And so I found a 12-step program, worked with a unique fellowship, but it it it's a question of proportionality. What right did I have not to live up to my dad's admonitions about family and making a difference in the world? I wasn't a starving peasant in Sudan. I wasn't. I'm not living in the Ukraine right now. I uh, don't have the last name Steinberg in the 30s in Nazi Germany. So it just created more of a sense of appreciation for trying to make a difference. One of the things I started to explore is there a way to maximize energy, stamina, resilience in athletes, and can that same modality extend into baby boomers, weekend warriors? So I went down to Medellin, Colombia, and had 240 million stem cells inserted. I've done hyperbaric oxygen. So if you remember at our Super Bowl party, we had a brain lounge with all these modalities, whether they were hyperbaric stem cell, light stem, process called RTMS, all of which can reinvigorate the brain and make a healthier body.
So one thing that stuck out to me at the party, not only was it one of the coolest parties that I've ever been to. I mean, I was blown away. And I don't know if you know this, Mr. Steinberg, but I have been an Oilers fan since I was 6 years old. And I'm still a Titans fan to this day. My favorite quarterback of all time is Warren Moon. My son has a Earl Campbell, helmet signed in his room. My son is the only 10-year-old who's an Oilers fan. No one else knows what that team is. But probably one of the greatest things, and it really blew me away, was when you were talking about brain health. And brain health in the NFL is something that could affect your livelihood, because these pro athletes, right? So, and you said something to me that shook me when you stood up at the end and you said that you had recommendations about tackle football and when to start. Can you talk about that? Because this really blew me away hearing it from your mouth. And it was almost, I don't know if it was something that you made sure that it came from you, but it was so powerful that it did. There was the panel, and then you came up and spoke. Can you talk to us about that subject and what you think about tackle football with young kids?
So I had a crisis of conscience, Kelly, back in the 1980s. I was representing half the starting quarterbacks in the NFL. They kept getting hit in the head. And when we'd go to doctors and ask, what are the long-term effects? How many of these are too many? What's the magic number? They couldn't give us answers. So I started holding concussion conferences, knowing that athletes were in denial about their physical health, that they were taught from Pop Warner and Little League to ignore pain, to not think about the implications of long-term health. And we started holding conferences to try to bring neurologists and other people with expertise to the problem. And every time an offensive lineman hits a defensive lineman at the inception of a play, it produces a low-level subconcussive event, just a little bit of change. So an offensive lineman could come out of football, having played in high school, college, and the pros, with 10,000 subconcussive hits, none of which have been diagnosed and none of which he's aware of, but the aggregate almost certainly does proclivity towards Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, premature senility, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and depression. So as we look at the problem, what positive steps can you take? Well, one of them is understanding that a young person's brain is still in development, and it can be traumatized by concussion. So you start to say, what's the first age where people should play tackle football? And it's probably not until high school. And so that gets you started. And then blocking and tackling techniques taught without using the head or neck at an early age. And then can you actually not hit during training camp or regular practices, but save those hits for the game? So you just model the plays. It's been done in the Ivy League. That alone cuts concussion down by 40%. And then we had a set of modalities like RTMS that can heal a brain, or biofeedback, or hyperbaric, all things which can be very helpful for the problem. So, my dad used to have a saying. He'd say, when you see there's a problem and you wait for someone else to solve it. And you can wait and wait and wait for the amorphous they or them to solve the problem, older people, political figures. And he'd say, son, you could wait forever. The they is you. You are the they. So the point is, who's supposed to campaign against concussion? Well, no one was doing it, but my concern is the long-term health of people I profess to love and care for, and not sending them down the road to dementia.
It's incredible again that you speak about something that can ultimately affect, but that's the reason why I've been so impressed, not only from a distance, and a lot of times you're impressed by someone from a distance, but when you get close up, you wish that you stayed at a distance. And it's been amazing because you've seen this, right? And I'm not going to ask for any names. I could say the names, right? But because they ain't going to come back on me. But I've been in situations where I wish that I didn't meet the person but with you, Leigh, getting the opportunity to be a little bit closer to you, it's just heightened the awareness and heightened the integrity of what it is that you do. And I want to applaud you on that. Every person out there that's listening would love to have a coffee table book of Leigh Steinberg stories. And not just and when I'm talking about it, it's a personal thing, like not just oh, wow, I signed this guy or we did this. I'm talking about the conversations like you were talking about in the limos. Can you give us a little story about Mr. Mahomes that helped to drive home the fact that what he was living in the light that he was living, that it was a little sign, like you were around him and you saw something that was something specific and an event that you guys were maybe at or that you experienced with him that helped to drive home the fact that character was real?
Well, he kept calling me Mr. Steinberg, and please call me Leigh. Anyway, so I said, and then he said, yes, sir, no, sir. And I said, Patrick, we're going to be working together for a long time. I think you can call me Leigh, and I don't think you need to say sir. To which he responded, yes, sir. So the point is that you saw that level of courtesy, respect, and the rest of it was just ingrained in him. And he was so grounded. He was so real. And the other thing is that we talked about doing endorsements in the first couple of years and made a decision just not to do them because he was entering a new situation where he had to prove to the owner, to the general manager, to the coaches, to the other players and the fans of the city, he was serious about his dedication to football. So before he was on 20 billboards and the rest of it, he'd established a charitable foundation. He was spending his Tuesdays and off days visiting at hospitals and visiting with the police and doing all sorts of community things. And you understood where his priorities are. And all the time he'll say, I'm not ready for that, or it's too. So where the average person would say, oh my God, I've got this opportunity, that opportunity. He's very smart about the understanding what his age is, what his progression is, and how to do things that are appropriate.
Is the book coming?
The Mahomes book?
No, your book, the Mr. Steinberg book.
Yes, it's well, I wrote Winning with Integrity, How to Get What You Want Without Losing Your Soul some years ago, and that's a negotiation primer. And then my last book was The Agent, and it sort of traced from my childhood. It was an auto-buy from Los Angeles in the 50s to being the student body president of Berkeley in the 60s and duking it out with Ronald Reagan and then all these years. And then the next one, which we're just starting work on, the last one ended in 2014. So this one will have my recovery from alcohol and substance abuse, and then it'll have rebuilding this new agency we did, and and then I do a thing on social media, Wednesday Wisdom, and it'll have some of the Wednesday wisdom in it. It's just little pointers about life. The last one was not to employ situational ethics, where you're uh, very nice to cats and dogs and your neighbors, and then you go out in the workplace and do heinous social Darwin tactics because it's just business and the end justifies the means, and how that split of values and inconsistency leads to a type of soul death.
What do you wish, like when you talked about the addiction part of it, what do you wish that people knew about alcoholism?
Um, that it's the disease that will convince someone they don't have a disease and will set someone up for denial. So you're not seeing the world clearly. And all of a sudden, it's possible to, you don't have to have a proclivity or family history of alcoholism. You can just drink your way into changing your brain. So the decision to drink stops being volitional and all of a sudden is just cravings, and which overwhelm the prefrontal lobe of the brain. And that there's help. And amidst all that detritus and destruction, there can be light at the end of the tunnel. Optimism will save you every time. If I go into a barn and there's a bunch of horse defecation, we'll call it, in the barn, I'm sure there's a pony in there somewhere. I'm just not finding it yet, but it'll be there.
So the documentary's coming too. You guys are working on a documentary. What can we expect with this, and what are some of the things that you want to make sure that people understand?
Well, I think in a sense, it'll be biographical. I had a father who ran a country club that was a grandfather who ran a country club that was the maven for all Hollywood stars. So, got a picture of me sitting on Marilyn Monroe's lap, and the comedian George Burns, and my grandpa took me to the first baseball game, and there was Groucho Marx. So it starts there, and then it goes up to Berkeley, where the whole counterculture was being born, and students and the war in Vietnam was going on, and then it'll take you through 48 years of a career in sports, trying to make a positive difference in the world, and hopefully will inspire a few people to realize that they've got the ability to change the world if it's just through parenting and bringing up children well. That's a major contribution. But we all, in our own way, in our own time, can make this a kinder, gentler world.
What's the tough part about being Mr. Steinberg?
I think the hardest part in representation of players is just the injuries, because pro football is a traffic accident on every play, and I've done baseball and basketball and the rest of it. But you feel so helpless when players get severely injured to try and help them, and it's also to try to, you look at the political strife in this country right now, and the reality of the situation is we're gifted. We got this great blessing to be born into a free country. And you can see it against the backdrop of what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainians. I mean, we have freedom, and we're all Americans. And I just wish we could get past the antipathy. If you think I'm going to cut off a friendship with someone because we have a difference over tariffs in business, it's not going to happen. I mean, find the commonality and humanity in other people, and look for the similarities, and stop hyper focusing on the differences.
Can you talk to us a bit about the duking it out with Ronald Reagan? Because I think that this is, I mean, you spent the time at Berkeley. I mean, you had an immense impact on so many different aspects, and this was a pretty defining moment for you.
So the war in Vietnam is going on, and President Nixon invaded Cambodia, and campuses were shut down across the country and started having classes off campus. So because of that, Governor Reagan wanted to fire the chancellor of Berkeley. And so I went in front of the Board of Regents to defend the chancellor and say he shouldn't be fired, that this is just a natural response. So Governor Reagan, then President Reagan, looks across the table and he says, "Weren't you the same Mr. Steinberg who was arrested for sitting in front of troop trains in Oakland in 1960? And I said, "Well, Governor, I was like just pushing 10 years old, and I was much more apt to be playing with toy trains than sitting in front of troop trains. But that shows your usual adherence to veracity and fact." Well, that got it going very quickly. And so later we laughed about it, and he had me in the White House. He gave me a commendation for community service, but it was a little tense at the time.
When you
I
come
always say that I learned everything I needed to learn about negotiating from dealing with Governor Reagan.
Really? So when you come from a place of love, like you come from a place of love, and also too, it's not just a, a love of like, oh, I just need to love everyone just here. You're coming from a sense of education, from background, from all those parts. What do you wish that people knew about politics from a different standpoint?
An understanding that the very fact we have a change of government every 4 years, that people actually leave office peacefully, makes us part of a unique experiment, and that we need to treasure that and to understand that democracies die. And we don't want to go so far in all this divisiveness where we lose the commonality of what puts us together, a faith, caring for family, caring for the community, and being part of something that's pretty great. It has its flaws, but it's pretty great.
Absolutely. So when you're thinking about from the sports aspect of it, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the organization. So obviously you deal with the players, but the players deal with the organization, and you deal with the organizations. What is the difference between a organization that continues to win? And I use a couple of them that we just had. I say we because I'm a Titans fan, so I feel like I'm a part of it. But we, in the last couple of years, have had a culture change, and that has been, it's started to have a championship kind of mentality. We haven't got there yet. I believe we will. Titans out there, I love you. Titan fans, I love you guys. But what's the difference because it's like, it's not that much different in the talent of the players, right? It's not that much different in the talent of the coach. There's minuscule differences between them, but what is it that gets an organization over the hump and becomes a dynasty?
So remember that there are parity systems now with drafting in the reverse order how you finished the year before. Huge differences in how much salary cap money there is to spend to try and help teams that are rebuilding. And the system's designed so that you would not have dynasties, right? It forces teams to discard some of their players just for cap reasons. It's a system designed to make sure that a team will go up 3-4 years, be fairly dominant, then come down and rebuild. But that's not what happens. And the reason is, if you were going to have a draft, you would want to draft owners, team executives, and coaches, because a enlightened owner with a sense of vision and stability, and a front office that understands how to evaluate talent, draft it, trade for it, sign free agents, and a coach who's got a specific design for the way to play. And it can be a lot of different systems. Bill Belichick has one that focuses on schematics and then modularity. He can plug and play any player into a situation because he designed schemes that the wide receiver is going to catch the ball, but again, it doesn't matter because he can't cover them. So if a team is either at the bottom for a while or at the top, imagine Ben Roethlisberger, who I represented at the beginning of his career. He just retired. He had 18 years with the Pittsburgh Steelers and never a losing season. Now, that shouldn't happen in parity, but there's something magical about the ownership of that team and coaching and the way it works. So quality organizations will win, and ones that don't have as clear a vision won't. I always look at it like the Oklahoma land rush. There are wagons that knew exactly what plot of land they were going for and had a plan and went directly there. And there were other wagons that never got off the line. So the point is, do you have a structural way of viewing how to win that makes sense and is superior, and will you stay with it and not keep changing it?
Well, I want to tap into that last statement that you said, because I'm a number one, a very my education on the organizations, I would say, is very low. I'm an irrational fan of and I've got my own opinions.
Thank goodness for you. We need more. We need millions like you.
And I've got a thing called NFL math, which makes the Titans the greatest team of all time, all the time. Just like we beat the Chiefs beat the Bengals got beat by the Rams, but the Rams got beat by the Titans. Therefore, the Titans are the Super Bowl champions. This is NFL math to me. But again, irrational. I was having a conversation with my friend the other day. His name is Will. And we were talking about it. I said, what is the difference? I said, for me, the difference between the successful organizations and the non-successful organizations, I find one glaringly obvious thing, and it's the tenure of the coach, right? And so what would you say to, an organization that continues to hire a coach and then literally not have a winning season, and then they just switch them out and they switch them out, they switch them out. Whereas when you look at the Steelers, you look at the Patriots, you look at, anybody else who has longevity and dynasty qualities, they have stuck with a guy and continued with the culture. Why is it that people keep giving up that way?
Because they feel under the pressure to win and they have little patience. I remember once I was talking with Dan Rooney, and who owned the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it was a point early in his career, and Ben Roethlisberger was hurt. And there were all sorts of alarms going off that if he didn't return quickly, they would lose the season. And I talked to Dan, and he said, don't listen to any of that. If we lose a few games, if the season doesn't go well, our long-term interest is having this quarterback, and we'll do anything to safeguard his health. So there was someone looking at the long term and saying, I'm not going to respond to the instant pressures and critics and the rest of it, because we may lose a few games without our starting quarterback. What's more important is that we have him for the long term. So what I can tell you is that sort of perpetual change destabilizes players, and it doesn't allow long-term planning. And so when you look at some of the younger coaches who will be long-term coaches, like a Sean McVay at the Rams, or you look at the coach of San Francisco. These are young coaches that do have a plan. They do have a system. They know how they want to utilize players. And so it's continuing to have instability and change will destroy any organization. That's different from realizing and making the decision that you're going in the wrong direction and making a course adjustment, which people have to be open to. But again, look to the quality of those owners. Look to how they hire and who they hire to do the analysis and putting together of a team, how they handle a salary cap, how they are able and then who your coach is, and having someone that's got a plan, and it can be any plan as long as it makes sense in terms of how to win in sports.
So I know this one has been a divisive subject, but what is your take on athletes getting paid in college now, and having the ability to be able to earn? And the reason why I say it is because there's as in America and everything, there's the polar side. There's the one side that's like, yes, the colleges are making so much money, and these kids need to get a piece of it. There's the other side that these kids at 18, 19 years old, sometimes, 17, 18, 19 years old, they come into this type of money. This could kill their career because they could go off the rails. Where do you stand on this, and what's your opinion?
This fight is over. The cow is out of the barn. And the NILs started July 1st, but this is the new normal.
Okay.
And all across the country, it wasn't just the quarterbacks at Alabama, it was female athletes, it was Phil Knight giving every athlete at Oregon stipend. It was Sam's Club giving 15 athletes with the first name Sam a stipend, or Jack in the Box doing the same thing with a number of people with the first name Jack. It's here, and the NCAA could have forestalled this by increasing the amount of money that went to at-risk or financially challenged athletes, because they would come to a college campus and they looked at their non-athletic peers with nice cars or the ability to work during the school year, and the athlete might be sending part of his scholarship home. So they were resentful because they saw the massive crowds, they saw the TV contracts, they saw their jersey being sold in the student store, the jersey number being sold, and they were eating top ramen. So the problem comes from the athlete who is disadvantaged, and if anything, the challenge is what you said, that you could build up too high a level of anticipation for a young player. But if you take someone like Bryce Young, Nick Saban came out and said he'd made $1 million from endorsements. He was a freshman. Theoretically, that could go to his head. He went out and won the Heisman Trophy. So the right athlete will keep balance to it. And as I told you the story about Mahomes not doing commercials in his first year and a half, there's an intelligent way to balance progression in a career as against financial opportunity, but there's no turning back, because when California passed SB 206 and said California athletes could have a marketing advisor for name, image, and likeness, then the rest of the states got frightened because they thought California will have the advantage in recruiting. And they'll all end up at SC and UCLA and Cal and Stanford. So that forced the NCAA to move to this new system, but they could have kept some controls on if they had adjusted quicker.
I know this is going to make you unpopular with some of your friends. Just on the field, I'm not talking about, just on the field as far as talent, your top quarterback of all time.
Well, it's Tom Brady. I mean, I don't think there can be much argument. No, the critical key for a franchise quarterback and quarterback judgment of greatness is, can you take your team to and win the Super Bowl? It's not statistics, it's not honors, it's a team sport, and that's the ultimate testimony. And no one ever anticipated that someone would take care of their body, use nutrition, use every modern training technique in a way that would allow them to play productively into their mid 40s. And along the way, have a unrivaled dynasty.
Does Tom Brady come back to the NFL?
No. Now, he will want to, because I've never met a player who willingly retired. They either get too old, they get too injured, no one wants their services. And then you'll say, well, what about this quarterback, this quarterback, this quarterback? They walked off into the sunset. Yes, but I guarantee you 4 games into next year, Tom Brady will be calling his agent saying, you think I could play again? He won't, but the point is, this is what he's known. This is what his structure is.
Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, best landing spot for both of them. In your opinion,
Aaron Rodgers ought to stay in Green Bay. He's got a marvelous supporting cast, and they're a winning team, and he's loved there. So why change? I mean, the fact that Brady did it, fine, but if you want to win now, that's fine. And Russell Wilson, I don't even understand what the problem is. I thought he was fairly valued there, and they went through a rough year, but look, there are teams that need quarterbacks, but uh, if I was Russell Wilson, I'd stay in Seattle.
I was selfishly hoping you would say the Titans on one of them.
You know, here's the point. If not Ryan Tannehill, then who? And so if you've got a quarterback, before you figure out that you should replace him, you better ask yourself, in this quarterback-centric game, if you've got one, and unless you're sure he can't take you to the next step, you better think about who you'll play.
What do you think about the culture change? I alluded to it, and again, I'm an irrational Titans fan. What have you seen, or have you noticed that the impact of the culture of the Titans change in the last couple of years?
It comes from the coach, and they've got a no nonsense, positive coach, and they have the best running back in football, who's dominant, and a tenacious defense. So I'd follow them closely, because because I had Javon Kirsch there. And before that was where Warren Moon and Ray Childress and David Williams and a whole set of players were. But they've got a winning culture now. And it's always difficult in the playoffs. Remember, the talent so evenly balanced there. We had a weekend where 4 games defied logic by all coming down to the last play. So the Titans are in the mix, and at some point they'll break through.
So I got a chance to talk to John Robinson, the GM. He was on the show, and when I talked to him, I asked him, how did you start to change the culture? And he told me something that kind of shocked me. He told me that he was in his office. He looked out the window. He saw a bunch of trash on the practice facility. He put on jeans, a T-shirt out of his suit, went down and picked up the trash himself, took pictures of it, sent it to the rest of the organization, said, if we're a championship organization, this shouldn't happen. He started to change the culture. What is the jeans and T-shirt that you do in your company that is so elementary that makes the biggest difference?
So the question is, what will be your legacy? can we make a difference in this world? Can we make sports healthier? Because I think of myself as a steward of the sport. If sports aren't healthy, for example, what's happening in baseball right now is self-destructive. I mean, I always support the players, but no sport in the midst of a pandemic should be cutting off their regular play. It's just pushes fans away. So the point is, how did you make a difference in this world? How is this better? Did you make it through impacting athletes' lives? Did you make it through being a good parent? Did you make it through extending a helping hand to people who can't? It's that we have a larger mission here. And it's not just putting more dollars into players' bank books. We feel like they deserve and earn all the money, but at the same time, how are we enhancing their lives? Are we preparing them for second career? Are we together using sports in a way that can make it a nicer society? So it's by having a mission and a concept that we have a larger purpose.
Mr. Steinberg, I was wondering if you could clear something up for myself and my best friend David. He's my best friend since I was in 6th grade, and he happens to be a Chiefs fan. I told you I'm a Titans fan. I believe that Warren Moon is an Oiler, and that's where he identifies. He thinks that he's a Chief. Can you help us with this argument?
Oiler.
No pause. That wasn't even, you didn't even pause at all. I love that. I love that, Mr. Steinberg.
Warren was at the very end of his career and was playing his like 23rd year. And he was at Kansas City, which he loved. He loved the experience. But he came back in 1984 to the Oilers, and they probably never should have traded him. But his first experience and most enduring experience outside of Edmonton was Houston.
So with that, I mean, I think the argument that I make to everyone, again, I'm an irrational fan, but the argument that I make to everyone is, in the event that Warren would have been allowed to play in the NFL as a quarterback from the beginning and not go to Canada, I mean, he probably would have held every record that was out there. Am I correct?
Yes. There's no doubt about that, because if you just add them together, I mean, he dominated Canada, but it takes a while for a quarterback to read the field, but so it takes a little adjustment, but eventually he would have broken every record, because he played 23 years. Brady played 22, and now, the only thing about it is the game was not quite, even though the Oilers were, the game wasn't quite as pass happy then.
So,
in other words, you didn't see people throwing the ball 50 times a game.
we tried it with the run and shoot, but that didn't seem to be as sustainable.
Close. Just one awful game in Buffalo.
That is. I have Buffalo Bills fans, and it still hurts my heart. Although we got him back with the Music City Miracle, we got him back.
Yes,
but still, it just still hurts.
Yeah. Well, I had Bruce Smith and Thurman Thomas on the Bills, so I feel very strongly for all 32 teams.
So, with all the interviews that you've ever done, and you've done them all over the world for all different people and things like that, what is the one question that you wish someone would ask that they've never asked? And what is something that you have never told anyone on an interview?
Nobody's really ever asked me how I define success, right? In other words, they just assume if you're successful in business or successful in something else. So that would be something. And then that I was, here's what I haven't told anybody. I was raised to be political. I was raised to to be someone who changed the world. I just fell into sports agentry back in 1975 when the first pick in the first round asked me to represent them. But this was never predestined. There was no sports law when I started off.
So
There wasn't a guaranteed right of representation. So someone could just hang up the phone and say, we don't deal with sports agents.
What do you wish that your kids knew more about their dad?
My kids have been great and industrious and everything else, but I don't think they have any idea of their father sitting in his parents' card room starting his profession, with being his own secretary, being there were phones then that if you dialed someone and they were on the phone, it would ring busy. So, in other words, we tried to give him everything. And that initial sleeping in an airport, sleeping in your car, all those days, I think, are incomprehensible to them.
So, I mean, probably one of the things that connects you a lot. I mean, obviously it's with all the greatest quarterbacks of all time and the number one sports agent in the world, but a lot of people connect you to the Jerry Maguire, the Jerry Maguire experience. We know that a lot of it is Hollywood. They build it up to be able to make a movie and sell the thing. What was the truest?
There's Cuba Gooding, there's Tom Cruise.
For those of you watching, you just saw that. For you, those of you listening, Mr. Steinberg just turned around in his chair and just pointed to a picture on his desk of them, of who he was speaking about. Okay, there's the Hollywood side of it that sells movies. What was the part that you were like, they got that one and that's exactly what happened? Or was there a moment like that in the movie?
Well, Cameron Crowe, the film writer-director, asked if he could follow me around to write and direct a film based on a sports agent. So he followed me in 1993 everywhere. He went to the NFL draft. He went to league meetings. He came to pro scouting day at SC. He came to games. He came to Super Bowl. He came to that same Super Bowl party. And I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. I thought that he got the conflict between decent values and the competitive nature of the world pretty well. That fight between being social Darwin in terms of how you compete and trying to have some integrity. And I think he also got real well that there's real caring that goes on between an agent and clients. It's not business in the classical sense because you're taking someone at such a young age and you're going through life with them. And I think he got that right too.
Two-part question. When is an athlete when have you ever saved one? Right? Like helping them to circumvent, like you see something up ahead, you give them a piece of advice, hey, we move this way. And then when has it been the reverse where you've made a mistake and they've saved you?
Well, Warren Moon, because we were together for so long, used to give me advice all the time, and I relied on him. So there were players in the practice that in our field had good judgment, and there were circumstances where I would ask them, what would you do here, or what would you do here? And in terms of players, there were points where I saw certain players struggle with addiction or with other problems, and I won't name them, but I tried to get them help.
Transactional and relationship, it seems to be the at the core of what it is that you do. You're not a transactional guy. You're a relationship guy. When has this ever left money on the table or left opportunity on the table that sometimes you didn't see the return on, because when you're not a transactional person, you're always looking long term. Everything that you've said today has been about long term. But there's some times where the long term, you don't see that return, and sometimes you never will. Has there been a time where you've experienced that?
Well, we all, we're in a business that's all about relationships, and you deal with the same people over and over and over again. So there are times where you don't have to drag every last penny out of a situation, because in the future you're going to deal with that same person. So if I have Dan Rooney and it's Ben Roethlisberger, and he wants an additional year, I'd rather the player not be obligated for that additional year, but it's going to be the same person um, who deals with his veteran contract. So there's goodwill you can carry over in a situation. If you see someone else's neck exposed, don't stick your foot on it, because the only thing I can tell you for sure is you'll be vulnerable in the same way.
So, Mr. Steinberg, I started the podcast because of my kids, Maddox and McKenna. And you've been on the show. This is your second time on the show, and I want to thank you for that. I mean, your time is so valuable to me and so valuable to the world, so valuable to every single person listening. But I started the started the podcast because I wanted to take iconic figures like yourself that are so humble to be able to spend time with us, but to show them that literally that anything is possible. The Leigh Steinbergs of the world are not superheroes. They're just people who have phenomenal attitudes, amazing work ethic. And so what advice would you give to Maddox and McKenna? And if you could use both of their names, it would be awesome.
To have a set of values that are important to you and stick with them. And the same as my father gave me: treasure relationships, especially family, and know that you've got the capacity to help people who can't help themselves. And if there's one critical skill, it would be listening, drawing out another human being. Again, if you can put yourself in someone else's heart and mind and see the world from their perspective, you can navigate your way through life gracefully.
Mr. Steinberg, you have been absolutely phenomenal. I I know the documentary is coming out. Another amazing book is going to be coming soon. We're gonna have links to all of this in the future. And a thing that I've said and I've told you before, that I'm going to force you to be my friend for the rest of your life. So you can't get rid of me. I look forward to having you on the show. In the future. And it's amazing. I want the coffee table book. I want the coffee table book of I would love to have the one that is just the things that bring Leigh Steinberg joy. So that's how I want to end it today. What is something, because again, you have amazing purpose, amazing vision. You work with some of the greatest athletes, if not the greatest athletes in the world, and you are the greatest sports agent to ever live. What do you do, Mr. Steinberg, that is just for you, that's just belly laughing, that's so silly, that means nothing, that doesn't get you any business, but just makes you laugh, that makes your stomach hurt?
Well, movies and books, but I love the beach and the water. And there's just something about the power of the sun that makes me smile. And I'm not sure about all that greatest agent stuff, but hopefully we've had a little impact.
Well, you absolutely have. So now's the time. Click the links in the bios. Check the sponsors. Do all the things that you know you need to do. But Mr. Steinberg, it has been an absolute pleasure. I want to thank every single person out there for listening, and also share this with any single person that you possibly can, especially all the Chiefs fans that think that Warren Moon is a Chief, because he's not. He's an Oiler and a Titan forever. Mr. Steinberg.
I'm going to say one thing
Yeah.
about the Chiefs now. In addition to Patrick, I have a history with the Chiefs. I represented Brad Buddy, Derek Thomas, Deron Cherry, Nick Lowry, Tony Gonzalez. I've got long history with the Chiefs. And with that, I'll say adieu.
You're officially off the hot seat.